I once thought 25 years of fighting on the battlefield was the greatest challenge of my life. But no, the real war began right here in this upscale suburban neighborhood, where I thought I'd find peace. A self-proclaimed overlord spat in the face of my disabled son. A vicious kid relentlessly tormented him, and an arrogant family believed they could crush us. Solely because of our skin color and our differences. They don't know who I am, and they certainly don't expect the storm that's about to crash down on them. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's the destruction of those who abuse power, thrive on corruption, and perpetuate racism at the heart of a falsely perfect community. Leave a comment with the word 9, so we know you're ready for the next chapters of the story. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to join us in exposing all the darkness that lies ahead. I'm Darius Jackson, 47 years old, a black man born and raised in Harlem, New York. After more than 25 years serving in the U.S. Navy SEALs, I retired and moved with my family to an affluent suburban neighborhood in search of peace. A mechanical engineer before enlisting, I once thought life after the military would be calm days spent with my wife and kids, but it turns out I still have to fight. Not on a battlefield, but right here in this very community. Karen, the self-appointed ruler of our neighborhood, flew into a rage and hurled racial slurs before spitting directly into the face of my 13-year-old disabled son. Her arrogance didn't stop there. Her cruel son relentlessly bullied mine at school, and her haughty husband always backed them both. They thought they could manipulate everyone in this community, especially our black family, daring to step into their perfect HOA-controlled world. What they don't know, I'm a retired Navy SEAL. From petty initial harassment, things quickly escalated into an all-out war that Karen and her family never saw coming. It started like this. When my wife and I moved to this upscale neighborhood, we hoped to find a peaceful place where our 13-year-old son, Jamal, could thrive without judgmental stares. Jamal was born with cerebral palsy, confining him to a wheelchair, but his spirit has never been restrained. He's a bright, kind kid, obsessed with robots, chess, and design sketches he dreams of one day turning into reality. But peace isn't what we found. From the moment we arrived, we weren't welcomed, only grudgingly tolerated, and even that was fragile. One particular kid, let's call him Bryce, made tormenting my son his personal mission. Bryce is the spoiled son of the HOA president, Karen, and her pompous husband, Leonard. He struts around school like he's king, targeting anyone he deems beneath him. And Jamal, a black, disabled kid in a mostly white, wealthy space, was his perfect prey. It began with venomous, sharp, malicious taunts. Bryce would linger near Jamal in the hallways, smirking. Better watch that wheelchair doesn't roll as slow as your people fleeing the slums. His cronies snickered while Jamal clenched his fists, forcing a strained smile to hide the sting. But Bryce didn't stop at words. He spread rumors that Jamal's high grades were just petty privileges from teachers too soft on his kind. He'd deliberately bump Jamal's wheelchair, hard enough to jolt him, but subtle enough to avoid real blame. Jamal told us about it, his voice calm but his eyes heavy. He didn't want us to make a fuss. Didn't want to be that kid who causes trouble. That's Jamal's nature. Tougher than steel, refusing to let a coward define his worth. Still, my wife and I reported it to the school, demanding action, but their zero-tolerance policy was a sham. They called Bryce in, made him scribble a half-hearted apology, then let him go with a smug grin. "I was just kidding," he'd say, eyes glinting with mockery. Who knew he'd be so sensitive? The administration swallowed it every time, calling it boys being boys. No real punishment, no accountability, just a green light for Bryce to keep pushing the limits. Tell me where you're reading from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like and follow so we can fight for justice together. At first, Jamal tried to ignore it, telling himself Bryce was just a loudmouth hiding behind his rich parents. But Bryce wasn't your average bully. He was a predator, egged on by his useless posse. The taunts turned into deliberate humiliation that teachers never caught. One day in the cafeteria, Bryce snuck up from behind and dumped a tray of fries drenched in ketchup onto Jamal's lap. The mess clung to legs he couldn't move to shake off. Laughter erupted as Jamal's hands shook, trying to wipe it away. Bryce feigned innocence, chuckling. Oops, your wheelchair too slow to dodge? Maybe your dad can trade food stamps for a better one. Jamal gritted his teeth, but I saw fire in his eyes when he recounted it that night, his voice breaking just once. Then Bryce crossed into darker territory. Jamal loved the school's art room, his quiet sanctuary for sketching. One afternoon, he was lost in a robotic arm design when Bryce and his crew barged in. The air shifted. Jamal sensed the threat before he saw it. Stifled laughs, footsteps circling. Then Bryce's voice boomed, loud and vicious. Look, it's Wheelchair Picasso. Jamal bowed his head, pencil still moving, praying they'd get bored and leave. They didn't. Bryce dragged a chair over, straddling it backward, his friends blocking the exit. Jamal gripped his pencil tighter. Bryce leaned in, sneering. Drawing stuff for that ghetto you crawled out of? Jamal looked up, voice steady despite the storm inside. This is beyond your comprehension, Bryce. For a split second, Bryce's smile faltered. His crew laughed, but his eyes darkened. That's when Jamal knew he'd riled the beast. Bryce snatched the sketchbook from Jamal's hands, holding it up like a trophy. Let's see this masterpiece. He tore out a page, crumpling it with flair. Jamal reached out. Give it back. Now. Bryce dangled it higher, out of reach. Want it? Jump up and get it. Hotshot. One of them pulled out a phone to record. Jamal's chest tightened as Bryce mocked. Oh right, you're stuck down there. Guess that's why your kind never gets ahead. The words cut deeper than any punch, but Jamal held firm, refusing to break. Bryce leaned closer, whispering, Beg me, or I shred it all. Silence stretched taut. Jamal's hands gripped his wheelchair, knuckles white, but he didn't speak. Bryce wanted a show. Jamal wouldn't give it to him. Furious, Bryce tossed the sketchbook into the trash. But as he turned to gloat, Jamal rolled over, retrieved it, and stared him down. Anything else? His voice was ice. The room fell silent. Bryce's lackeys shifted awkwardly. They hadn't expected this. Bryce's face twisted with rage, humiliated in front of his pack. He stormed off, snarling a threat. Next time you're dead, cripple. Jamal's hands trembled as he smoothed the crumpled page, but he knew it wasn't over. Bryce's hatred had just found fresh fuel. Then came the day that chilled me to the bone. Jamal was waiting for me to pick him up outside school when Bryce and his gang surrounded him. No warning, no preamble, just Bryce's petty, venomous voice. Think you're better than me? Jamal stayed silent, eyes steady. Bryce grabbed the wheelchair handles, spinning him so hard the tires screeched on the pavement. Jamal clung to the armrests, panic flashing across his face as Bryce tilted the chair, front wheels dangling. Run for it, Bryce sneered, holding him there before shoving hard. The chair slammed down, jarring Jamal's spine. He bit back a groan as Bryce's crew howled with laughter. That night, Jamal told me everything, voice low but hands shaking. I felt a rage I hadn't known since my SEAL days. A deep, burning fire that only ignites when someone you love is attacked, not just for who they are, but for what they represent. This wasn't just bullying. It was a hate-fueled assault on my son's dignity. And Karen, Bryce's mother? She wasn't just complicit. She was the mastermind. From the day we moved in, Karen saw us as outsiders. She fined us for nonsense. Our mailbox was too urban, Jamal's wheelchair ramp ruined the aesthetic, and banned him from the community playground, claiming his chair was a safety hazard. When my wife confronted her about Bryce's behavior, Karen smirked. If your son didn't stand out so much, he wouldn't invite trouble. People like you need to learn to fit in. She didn't just tolerate Bryce's racism and cruelty. She cultivated it, molding him into a miniature version of herself. Bryce's venom, his unchecked spite, his belief he could do anything. It all stemmed from Karen. I'd seen her handiwork before. Another mom, Tasha, once begged her to rein Bryce in after he scrawled slurs on her son's locker. At an HOA meeting, Tasha stood, voice trembling. Bryce is tormenting my kid. He wrote filthy things on his stuff. What are you going to do? Karen smiled smugly. Oh, Tasha. Kids play rough. Your boy should whine less and blend in. The room went quiet, but Karen leaned closer, whispering loud enough for all to hear. If you people didn't make everything about race, life would be easier. Tasha left in tears, broken. Bryce walked free, Karen's untouchable prince. The breaking point came on a sweltering afternoon as Jamal and his best friend Tariq walked home from school. Tariq was Jamal's rock, a fellow black boy who saw past the wheelchair to the brilliance within. They were discussing chess strategies when Jamal froze. He sensed it. Footsteps closing in, menacing snickers echoing around them. Bryce and 4 of his lackeys emerged from the bushes, faces twisted with glee, blocking their path. Jamal gripped his wheels as Tariq stepped forward, shielding him. Bryce grinned wide. Look at this. 2 for the price of 1. Hired yourself a little bodyguard. Huh. Tariq stood tall. Get lost, Bryce. I'm done with your games. Bryce laughed, the sound harsh and ugly. Done? You don't get to decide that. Before they could react, Bryce lunged, shoving Tariq into a tree. As Tariq fell, one of the goons grabbed Jamal's wheelchair and flipped it hard. Jamal crashed to the ground, his shoulders slamming into a rock, blood seeping from a gash on his arm. Bryce towered over him, spitting. Stay where you belong, trash, Tariq roared, charging at Bryce. But the pack piled on. Fists swinging, boots stomping, and a barrage of slurs. Go back where you came from. You don't belong here. They beat Jamal and Tariq bloody, leaving them sprawled on the ground. Jamal's wheelchair tipped over, its wheels spinning uselessly. Bryce kicked it into a ditch as he walked off, laughing. Tell your dad this is my turf. When they limped home, Jamal's shirt was torn to shreds, his face swollen, dried blood crusting his lip. Tariq's nose was broken, his breathing ragged. I stepped outside and saw them. My 2 boys, battered but unbowed, and my heart shattered. Jamal! I barked, crossing the yard in an instant. Who did this? Jamal looked up, eyes blazing through shame and fury. Tariq panted. Bryce's crew. Jamal muttered. It's fine, Dad. Let it go. Fine. I stared at the bruises on his black skin, the blood on his hand, and something inside me snapped. A primal rage. My wife, Nia, rushed out, her scream choking. Jamal, God, what happened? He turned his face away, ashamed. I met Nia's eyes, voice low and hard. Bryce beat them bad. Nia's hands cradled Jamal's face, trembling. Monsters. I'm calling the cops. No, I said, cold as steel. She blinked, stunned. I looked at Jamal. You think the school or the police will care about 2 black kids in this town? He didn't answer. We both knew the truth. I straightened. Get inside. Clean up. I'll handle it. Tariq's eyes widened. What are you gonna do, Uncle Jackson? I didn't reply. Bryce's father was about to face me. And soon, this whole neighborhood would learn what happens when you push a seal past his limit. I'm not the type to knock and beg for a chat. I spent more than 25 years in the SEALs, fighting in places where negotiation wasn't words. It was leverage, power, and dominance. And now I held all 3 in my hands. I didn't drive. I walked. I wanted them to hear me coming, each heavy step a warning they couldn't dodge. Bryce's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac. An over-the-top mansion Karen had decked out with flower beds so perfect they felt fake. The kind of place built to flaunt to people who didn't matter. The lawn was trimmed to absurd precision, a symbol of the sick control Karen enforced through her ridiculous HOA rules. I marched to the front door and didn't knock. I pounded. Bam! 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 Seconds later, footsteps thudded. Heavy, annoyed, and the door swung open. Leonard, Bryce's father and Karen's husband, stood there in a ratty bathrobe, grease-stained tank top, eyes narrowed in irritation. What do you want, you bastard? I didn't flinch. We need to talk. Leonard sneered, voice dripping with contempt. Talk? I don't recall inviting your kind here. I stepped forward, forcing him to back up or get flattened. He backed up. I slammed the door behind me. His confidence flickered. Good. Bryce was on the couch, game controller in hand, eyes bulging when he saw me. He froze, not daring to speak. Guilty as sin. I turned to Leonard. Your son and his buddies beat my kid today. Leonard smirked, defiant. Oh yeah? Got proof? Or are you just making stuff up like your people always do? I stepped closer, closing the gap until he could smell the fury radiating off my skin. I don't need proof. My kid came home bruised and bloody. He doesn't lie. Your brat does. Leonard laughed, unfazed. Kids fight. If your boy can't handle it, why don't you take him back where you belong? My hands clenched into fists. The only reason he was still standing was because I chose to let him survive this moment. Bryce tried to slink off the couch. Sit down. My voice cracked like a whip. Bryce froze, plopping back down. Leonard's grin faded. Don't think you can come in here acting tough, you savage. I tilted my head. Savage? Then, in a flash, I grabbed his collar, hoisting him up like a broken doll. Bryce let out a choked yelp. Leonard flailed like a fish on a hook. Listen to me, Leonard, I said, voice calm, cold, lethal. I don't care how big you think you are in this neighborhood. I don't care how many times you've used money and pulled to cover for your rotten kid. I pulled him closer, my voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper. That ends now. Leonard clawed at my wrists, gasping for freedom. I dropped him. He stumbled back, coughing, face red with rage and humiliation. You're crazy, he bellowed, voice cracking. I adjusted my jacket, standing tall. Maybe, but I'll let you know who I am. I leaned in, my words a vow, not a threat. I'm the last nightmare you'll ever wish you faced. Bryce swallowed hard, trembling. Right then, the click of heels echoed on the tile, and the she-devil appeared. Karen. She strode in like she owned the world. Robe tied tight, hair in curlers, clutching a glass of red wine like she was at some high society gala. Her eyes landed on me, then flicked to Leonard, still wheezing like a drowning man, and she laughed. Laughed like this was cheap entertainment. Oh, look who it is. The neighborhood beggar making such a grand entrance. I turned slowly, locking eyes with her. What did you just say? Karen sipped her wine, unfazed. You're here about your little issue, right? I get it. Your kid? She waved a dismissive hand. Weak, fragile, like the rest of your lot. But that's not my problem, is it? I stared, waiting for her to realize she was teetering on a cliff. She didn't. She just smirked. You're not seriously blaming Bryce for whatever mess your kid stirred up, are you? I stepped forward, voice low, dangerous. Bryce didn't just stir trouble. He and his crew attacked my son, beat him while he was down, left him there. Karen rolled her eyes, dripping sarcasm. Oh, please, don't be dramatic. Kids roughhouse a little. If your boy can't take it, why not keep him in the filth you came from? My jaw clenched. Then she smirked again, sipping her wine. Maybe you should teach him how to toughen up instead of chasing silly soldier games. Might stop him being so pathetic. That was the final straw. Before I could think, I snatched the glass from her hand and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, red wine splattering across the pristine white of their fancy home. Karen shrieked, staggering back, eyes wide. Leonard lunged. You son of a... I whipped around, jabbing a finger in his face. One more word, Leonard. Try me. He shut up. Karen snapped out of her shock, face contorted with fury. How dare you? I advanced, towering over her, voice ice cold. No, you're the one who dared. She stepped back again. I saw it, the first flicker of fear in her eyes. I leaned in. Your kid's a coward. Your husband's a joke. And you? My voice dropped lower. You're just an arrogant parasite, thinking your HOA throne makes you untouchable. Karen's mouth fell open, speechless. Then my voice sank to a tone only battlefield survivors know. Steady, unyielding, absolute. Listen close, because I won't say this twice. I stared into Karen's eyes, letting her feel the full weight of my wrath. If your kid so much as looks at mine wrong, if he dares breathe near him, I shifted my gaze to Leonard, voice cutting like a blade. If he even thinks about touching my son, I'll make sure every cop, every lawyer, every judge in this state knows exactly what kind of degenerate parents you are. Leonard gaped at me, for once too scared to argue back. I turned and walked away. At the door, I paused, glancing back one last time. Keep your kid away from mine. Next time, I won't come to talk. I didn't need to look to know Bryce was slouched, hands trembling. As I stepped into the night, Karen and Leonard's screams chased after me. Their voices hoarse with rage, spewing every curse, every insult they could muster, like drowning souls grasping for one last breath. But I didn't turn back. I didn't flinch. Their words were nothing. They wanted war? Fine. I'd bring them a reckoning. When I got home, Karen and Leonard's shouts still echoed through the night, raw and desperate. But I knew what had just happened shook them, especially Bryce. He'd sat there, silent, shrinking into the couch, his usual swagger gone, replaced by real fear. Yet I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen and Leonard don't back down easily. They'd claw to the end to hold on to power, and Karen lived for control. I expected retaliation, and I was ready. In the days that followed, things shifted. Bryce steered clear of Jamal. He wouldn't look at him in the halls, at lunch, or in class. Like Jamal was a ghost that didn't exist. But Bryce didn't stop bullying. He just found new prey. Too scared to touch Jamal, he turned to other kids, easier targets. There was a girl in Jamal's class, Sasha. Small, quiet, the type who always kept to herself. She became Bryce's next mark. It started small. He'd snatch her backpack, rip her papers, and blame someone else. Then it escalated. Kicking over her bag, pouring water on it when she wasn't looking, laughing as she scrambled to pick up her things in a panic. Then there was Devin, a big kid, a little overweight but always avoiding trouble. Bryce and his crew cornered him after gym, mocking him, knocking food out of his hands, shoving him around like it was a game. And the younger ones, too. One afternoon, Jamal told me he saw Bryce trip a third grader in the hallway, laughing loud as the kid face-planted, lunch tray scattering everywhere. Bryce learned one thing from facing me. If he couldn't touch my son, he'd go after kids without a seal for a dad. Worse still, the school remained useless. Parents complained. Some reported it. Bryce got suspended once, then twice, but only for a few days. He'd strut back, cocky as ever, like nothing happened. Untouchable, or so he thought. It wasn't just Bryce plotting petty revenge. Karen was scheming her own comeback. I should have seen it coming. Her whole world revolved around puppeteering this neighborhood. And after that night, I trampled her pride. She couldn't let me walk away victorious. She started with petty HOA violations. A notice appeared in my mailbox. Your driveway violates HOA standards. Clean it or pay a fine. Clean it? Ridiculous. Then a second letter. Your grass is too long, against regulations. Too long? I'd mowed it yesterday. A third. Trash bins left out past HOA pickup time. Fine, $200. She was trying to nickel and dime me into submission. I ignored every letter. So Karen upped her game. And then, she crossed the line. It happened right in front of my house, in broad daylight. I just pulled into the driveway when I heard shouting. Not regular shouting, but Karen's voice, shrill, furious, spitting venom. And Jamal's voice, but not strong, not defiant, just small, shaky. That alone froze my blood. I cut the engine and bolted out of the car. The sight before me twisted my gut with primal rage. Karen loomed over Jamal, her face contorted with contempt, finger jabbing at his chest like she wanted to pierce it. Jamal sat still, hands gripping his wheelchair tight, face taut, eyes downcast. He wouldn't look at her, wouldn't respond. In that moment, I knew this wasn't some petty HOA spat. This was a racist humiliation, beyond any limit. I stormed over just as Karen's voice ripped through the air. I'm sick of your family ruining this neighborhood. If your kid wasn't some weak, useless thing like the rest of your kind, my son wouldn't have had to teach him a lesson. Before I could speak, she did the unthinkable. She spat on Jamal. Right there in my yard, under the daylight sun. A glob of spit landed on his jacket, right on his arm. Jamal flinched, an involuntary reflex, his eyes flashing with hurt. And me? All I saw was red. Rage erupting like a fire torching every shred of reason. For a few endless seconds, no one moved. I wasn't the only witness. The neighborhood saw it. 3 people watering plants, 2 walking dogs, 1 carrying groceries. All froze. An old lady gasped, "Oh my God!" Someone muttered, "Unbelievable." Karen seemed to realize she'd gone too far, but it was too late. She glanced around, her smugness cracking, a flicker of panic in her eyes. But I didn't look at her anymore. I went to Jamal, slow, controlled. I knelt, wiping the spit off his jacket with my sleeve. "You okay?" My voice was even calm. Jamal nodded, jaw clenched, but his hands trembled slightly on his wheels. I nodded back. "Go inside." He didn't argue, quietly rolling into the house. Then I turned to Karen. She smirked, arms crossed. "You should be grateful we even let your kind stay here." I advanced. Karen fell silent as our eyes locked. Her arrogance shattered. I took another step, then another. For the first time since we met, Karen backed up. "Do you know what you just did?" My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, cold, ringing across the yard, carrying down the street. People were watching. Leonard, her husband, stumbled out of their house, face twisted in confusion. "Karen, what the hell's going on?" Karen jutted her chin, masking her unease. "This guy's mouthing off to me." Mouthing off. My voice sliced through like a dagger. She flinched. I exhaled slowly, tilting my head. "Let me tell you something, Karen." I raised my voice, clear and loud. "I was a SEAL for 25 years. I've taken down warlords, terrorists, people who thought they were untouchable. But I've never, ever seen anything as low, as disgusting as what you just did today." Murmurs erupted. A SEAL. The guy Karen had tormented with fines, petty rules, vicious rumors was a SEAL. My voice dropped, precise, like facing an enemy on the battlefield. "Listen close, Karen, because you just made the biggest mistake of your life." She opened her mouth, but I stepped closer. So close she couldn't stand it. She backed up again. "You think you can spit on my son and walk away? You don't understand the cost of what you just did." Karen crossed her arms, forcing a smirk. "Oh, please, what are you gonna do? Call the cops?" "I'm waiting. Go ahead." I sighed, then smiled. Not a friendly smile, but one that warned. "You've lost everything and don't even know it yet." "No, Karen." My voice almost soft. "I'm not calling the cops, but when I'm done, you'll wish I had." She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, Karen was speechless. I gave her one last look, then headed inside. But before stepping in, I paused, speaking over my shoulder. "Enjoy the next few days, Karen. They're the last ones you'll have in peace." Then I went in. This wasn't war anymore. It was annihilation. Karen, Leonard, and their kid had tormented my family, attacked my son, spat in his face. Enough. It was time they paid. I'd promised Karen made the biggest mistake of her life. Now I'd prove it. Leonard loved pretending he was a retired SEAL at barbecues, HOA meetings, the gym. He'd brag about his military days, spinning fake war stories like he'd seen combat. He even wore a faded SEAL shirt, hoping for instant respect. One problem, he never made it past basic training. I knew it the first time we met. Real SEALs recognize each other. People think SEALs have a code, a handshake, or a secret phrase to identify one another. Truth? We don't need it. It's in how a person moves, reacts. Real SEALs don't fidget, shift their weight, or seek validation. They're calm, steady, always alert. Real SEALs don't puff out their chests to boast. They don't have to. Confidence is in their eyes. Real SEALs don't jump at loud noises or sudden chaos. We're trained for it all. Leonard? He had none of that. He didn't know the 30% rule SEALs use to push past physical and mental pain. The idea is, when you think you're done, you've only used 30% of your true capacity. There's 70% left to tap into. When your mind says quit, you're nowhere near your limit. I remember the first time I saw Leonard crowing about his seal days at a neighborhood barbecue. He stood in the crowd, spinning a story that didn't add up. Yeah, back in my seal days, we'd run 40 miles with 60-pound packs. No breaks. Someone handed him a plate of food. He nearly dropped it. I knew right then no seal loses grip over a paper plate. Another time I watched him grab a beer. A car backfired on the street. Loud. Sudden. I didn't blink. Leonard jumped, whipping around like he expected an attack. Real seals don't react like that. I was sure he was a fraud. One day, a neighbor invited a group of us to the local shooting range. Leonard, desperate to prove himself, tagged along. He swaggered in, acting knowledgeable, but when he picked up the gun, I saw it. Wrong stance, feet too wide, arms stiff like he'd never been trained. He fired. His shoulder jerked hard from the recoil. A real SEAL would brace it without thinking. Others noticed too. One guy asked, "Hey, you sure you were a SEAL?" Leonard forced a laugh. "Oh, it's been a while, a little rusty. You know how it is. I've been retired for years and can still shoot with my eyes closed." I decided to expose him. To be sure, I checked the internal SEAL database, the one that lists everyone who's ever earned the Trident. His name wasn't there. I even filed a Freedom of Information Act request for his military records. He enlisted, lasted a few days, then quit. Some warrior. I could have called him out the moment I had proof, but that'd be too easy. Leonard needed to be unmasked in front of the crowd that blindly admired him. The perfect chance came soon after. Every year, the town holds a Veterans Day fundraiser, a big event at the country club. It's packed with veterans, military families, community leaders, live music, good food, a silent auction, and most importantly, honoring those who served. Leonard couldn't resist. It was the ideal stage for his facade to crumble before everyone. Sure enough, when I walked in, Leonard was at the best table, strutting in a SEAL cap and an army jacket plastered with badges, half of which he had no right to wear. Spinning tales, bragging, laughing loud. The saddest part? People believed him. They nodded along to every lie, patted his shoulder like he was a war hero. Disgusting, but it wouldn't last much longer. Midway through, a retired Marine colonel, the event's organizer, took the stage. "Before we move on, I'd like to honor the veterans here tonight." Applause erupted. "Please stand so we can thank you for your service." I stood along with a few others. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Leonard rise, chest puffed out, SEAL cap perched proudly. His table clapped, shook his hand, nodded in respect. But the colonel on stage noticed, and things got interesting. "You there?" The colonel pointed at Leonard. "Where'd you serve?" Leonard beamed. "Navy SEALs." A few clapped louder. The colonel smiled. "SEAL, huh? Which team?" I swiveled my chair, watching. Leonard hesitated for a split second, then said, Team 5. I smirked. "Nonsense." The colonel nodded. "Great, a warrior. What class?" Leonard sipped his beer, feigning ease. "Class 79. Silence. The colonel's smile held, but his eyes sharpened. "Interesting." Leonard faltered. What's that mean?" The colonel leaned over the podium. "Because I trained Class 79. And I don't remember your face." Leonard forced a laugh. "Oh, it's been a while." I decided to finish it. Standing, I called out loud, "Hey Leonard, remind me, which phase of BUD/S gave you the most trouble?" His face twitched. He had no clue what I was asking. His eyes darted to the colonel, then back to me. Every phase was tough." A few nearby snickered, dead wrong. I stepped closer. "What was your class number?" Leonard cleared his throat. "Like I said, 79. I raised an eyebrow. "No, your class number. SEALs don't graduate by year, but by number. You'd know that." His hands shook. He glanced at Karen, who now stared at her husband in confusion. I forgot. It's been too long." I laughed. No seal forgets their class number. The colonel chuckled. Damn right they don't. Whispers spread. Leonard's face turned beet red. I don't need to prove anything to you. I smirked. Oh, you do. I pulled out my phone, tapped the screen. I've already checked. Leonard. Silence. I turned the screen, Freedom of Information Act response. His name, nowhere. A few gasped. I let it sink in, then delivered the final blow. You washed out after a few days of basic training. Not a SEAL, just a quitter. A woman at Leonard's table glared. Is that true? The colonel grabbed the mic. Looks like we've got a case of stolen valor here. A few veterans shook their heads. A big guy, ex-Army Ranger, stood up. Take off that SEAL cap. Leonard spun around. What? The Ranger gritted his teeth. Take it off. Leonard looked to Karen for rescue. She sat frozen, lips pursed, her arrogance gone. She couldn't save him. Do it! Someone muttered in the crowd. Stop pretending. It's pathetic. The voices grew. Take it off. Take it off. The chant swelled. Leonard roared. I'm not lying. You don't know anything. I'm a real SEAL. I crossed my arms, tilting my head. I asked you the simplest questions any SEAL would know, and you couldn't answer one. Pathetic. You didn't even bother learning how SEALs work. He huffed. You dare question me? I sacrificed for this country. I exhaled slow. You sacrificed nothing. The colonel, watching it all, shook his head. Take the cap off, son. Leonard stood there, trembling, cornered. With fumbling hands, he slowly pulled the SEAL cap off his head. Humiliated and exposed, Leonard bolted for the door, dragging a stunned Karen behind him. As the door slammed shut, the room erupted headshakes, curses flying. A guy at the bar let out a long whistle. Damn, that's embarrassing. An older vet leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. I served with real SEALs. Guys who'd live and die for their team. That clown wouldn't last 30 minutes in BUD/S. A waitress passing by rolled her eyes. And I gave him free coffee every day. The air shifted completely. Where Leonard once commanded respect and admiration, now there was only mockery. I exhaled, sipped my water, and glanced out the window to see him nearly shoving Karen into their car before peeling out of the lot. They'd spent decades manipulating, bullying, and controlling people. Now they were nothing. Leonard was humiliated, but one last piece remained, Karen. I didn't survive 25 years as a SEAL without learning how to track deceit, expose corruption, and take down targets with lethal precision. Karen was next. People had revered her power, believing she was the wife of an honored SEAL. When that illusion shattered, her credibility collapsed too. Leonard's unmasking planted seeds of doubt. If he lied about his entire military career, what else was Karen hiding? Neighbors started asking questions, and when they dug deeper, they found more than they expected. Turns out, Karen had weaponized the HOA for years, bullying families, twisting rules for profit, pocketing cash while pretending to protect the community. But she'd gotten careless. I had proof, every fake fine, every rigged vote, every dollar that vanished. Now it was time for the truth to bury her. Taking Leonard down publicly didn't just shame him, it isolated Karen. I reviewed my finds, compared them to the neighbors, and the pattern was undeniable. The families she despised, especially us, the only black family, were hit constantly. Grass over 3 inches, trash bins out past 12 hours, the wheelchair ramp, ruining the aesthetic. Her friends? Not a single fine ever. I needed hard proof. I dug deeper using public records and HOA documents. Comparing community spending to actual work done, what did I find? Invoices for repairs that never happened, payments to ghost contractors. Karen thought she was untouchable, but she had a fatal flaw. She trusted tech too much. I reached out to a former HOA treasurer, someone Karen forced out 8 months ago. They had emails. Karen pressuring vendors to inflate service costs for kickbacks, ignoring legit maintenance requests but approving cosmetic upgrades for her own house, bragging about manipulating the board like it was child's play. I gathered it all, screenshots, transactions, meeting minutes where she'd mid-session rewrite rules for profit. But I wasn't done. Karen used to silence anyone who questioned her, but with Leonard's fall, the fear she'd sown evaporated. Soon, I found an insider willing to talk, a current board member, bullied into submission by her, now ready to fight back. After I showed them her financial misdeeds privately, they spilled everything. Karen rigged nearly every major vote. She ignored complaints about Leonard and Bryce. Anyone who challenged her decisions got booted from the next meeting. The best part? They agreed to testify. Then I found something even better: video. Karen loved holding meetings at the clubhouse, where security cameras rolled. A contact got me the footage, and what I saw was enough to end her. Clips of her taking bribes from contractors. A meeting where she laughed while finding a disabled family for their ramp. The moment she declared, "I run this HOA. People like them don't get a say." With everything, bank records, emails, transactions, insider testimony, and video, I was ready. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in with a stack of files and a laptop, set to project her crimes for the whole neighborhood to see. Karen thought she was invincible. Too bad for her. When I strike, I don't miss. The meeting room was packed. Familiar faces filled the seats. Some annoyed, some indifferent, others just wanting it over. But tonight was different. The air felt heavy, taut like a string about to snap, as if something awful was coming. Karen strutted in, arrogant as ever, in a blazer, carrying her fake authority. She sat at the head of the table, back straight, lips pursed, eyes scanning the crowd like she was ready to crush anyone. She didn't know the storm was here. She glanced at me, already irritated. I stood, calm, steady. "Before we start tonight's agenda," I said, "the community needs to see this." Karen sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "If this is another petty complaint about..." I hit play. The screen lit up and her empire crumbled. First, the financial fraud screenshots of bank transactions, HOA funds vanishing, payments to fake companies. Karen's smile faded. Then the kickbacks, emails where she forced vendors to jack up prices, pocketing the excess, approving non-existent expenses. Whispers started, people shifting in their seats. But the knockout punch was the video. A grainy clip appeared. Karen lounging in the HOA office, laughing loud. "These people don't get a voice. I own this HOA. They comply or they pay." The room jolted. Karen froze. Then another clip, Karen mocking Jamal's ramp improvement request. If they want the neighborhood to cater to them, they should have picked somewhere else to live, somewhere fit for their kind. Gasps rang out. People turned, murmuring, hands over mouths. Someone muttered, "She really said that." All eyes locked on Karen. For the first time in her reign, she lost control, and she felt it. Her usually smug, confident face went pale, shattering like broken glass. In a panic, she shot up. This is distorted," she stammered. "I was just joking." Silence. No one bought it. Then a voice cut through the crowd. "Karen, is this true?" A woman near the front shook her head, eyes wide with shock. "You stole our money." Another voice, angrier. "You used HOA fees to fix your house." Karen's breathing quickened. Her hands gripped the table edge like it was her lifeline. Her eyes darted, searching for someone, anyone, to defend her. But there was no one left. She tried shouting over the outrage. "Nonsense. You don't get how much I've done for this place." But no one listened now. People leapt up, furious. "You're a crook. We trusted you. You ruined people's lives." A board member called for an emergency vote, and right then Karen was ousted. Karen roared, panting, slamming the table so hard a water bottle toppled. "This isn't over," she shrieked, voice cracking. "You can't do this to me. I built this HOA. I made this neighborhood." The board didn't even glance her way. An older woman among them, bullied by Karen for years, leaned back, arms crossed. "Built it? Or stole it?" Laughter rippled through the room. Karen flushed, unraveling. She whirled on me, snarling, "This is all you." Her trembling hand pointed at me. "You think you're a hero? Think you're better than me?" I didn't blink. "No, Karen. I'm just not a liar." Leonard barged in, standing tall, chest puffed, voice feigning authority. "You don't know who you're messing with," he bellowed, trying to reclaim dominance, but no one cared. A neighbor smirked. "Oh, we know exactly who you are. That's why we're not scared." Leonard's face twisted, jaw clenched like it might break. He grabbed Karen's arm. "Let's go." But Karen wasn't done. She lunged at a board member, rage turning to desperation. "You can't do this. I won't allow it." Security stepped in. 2 neighborhood volunteers, people she'd once dismissed, now blocking her path. One gestured to the door. "Time to go, Karen." The room erupted in applause as Karen and Leonard were escorted out like criminals. Her screams echoed down the hall. "I'm not done. I'll sue. I'll ruin you all." But no one listened. Karen was finished. Her name was wiped from every HOA record, her position gone, and by that weekend, she faced an investigation. By month's end, Karen and Leonard had to sell their house and leave the neighborhood. The morning they moved out, the whole street watched. I stood on my porch, arms crossed. Not to pity, not to say goodbye, but to make sure they were really gone. Karen was in the yard, frantically shoving boxes into a truck, hair a mess, her old perfect image destroyed. From across the street, Mrs. Harris, someone Karen had fined for years, called out in a mock-sweet tone. "Need help packing, Karen? Oh wait, you only like kicking people out." Laughter rang down the block. Karen spun around, fuming, mouth open to retort, but this time she had nothing to say. Leonard trudged to the truck, tossing bags harder than needed. When he turned, a neighbor from the HOA, the one who'd called him out for stolen valor, stood with arms crossed. "Not so tough now, huh, seal?" he smirked. The crowd roared. Leonard's face burned red, jaw clenched in agony. Finally, Karen and Leonard climbed into the truck. Karen slammed her door. Leonard turned the key, but the engine wouldn't start. He tried again, sputtered and died. The laughter grew louder. A neighbor, someone Leonard insulted at last year's barbecue, yelled, "Even your truck's done with you." Karen snapped, pounding the dashboard. After a few failed tries, Leonard cursed, jumped out and stormed to the moving truck. A minute later, the truck towed their dead vehicle away. Karen sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, staring out the window. The last thing I saw as they disappeared was her face. Angry, humiliated, gazing at the neighborhood she once ruled. Karen, Leonard, and Bryce sat in that truck, faces hard as stone. No pride, no smugness, just defeat. Neighbors stood outside, waving, laughing, cheering. This family didn't just leave, they were erased. Jamal rolled up beside me, watching the truck fade. "They're really gone, Dad?" I ruffled his hair, smiling. "Really gone. And they're never coming back." A few houses down, neighbors stood on their lawns, watching too. Some shared satisfied nods. Others cracked open beers to celebrate. Karen thought she'd reign over this place forever. But in the end, the truth caught up with her. I exhaled, watching their truck vanish. For years, Karen and Leonard ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist. They thought fear and manipulation would keep them on top forever. But bullies, whether hiding behind a school uniform, a fake military past, or sham authority, always fall the hardest. Karen, Leonard, and Bryce thought they could bully their way through life, but they picked the wrong family to mess with, and they sure as hell picked the wrong real seal. The story of Darius Jackson facing off with Karen, Leonard, and Bryce isn't just a gripping journey about justice. It mirrors raw issues in modern society. Racism, abuse of power, and corruption still quietly creeping through communities, from schools to neighborhoods. What I admire is how Darius turned pain into strength, using patience and smarts to expose the truth instead of letting anger lead. This tale shows us a lesson. When facing injustice, we don't need to sink to our enemy's level. Stand tall, gather the facts, and let the truth speak. This is just a fictional story for entertainment and education, not meant to discriminate, criticize, or offend any person or group. Any similarities are purely coincidental. What do you think of this journey? Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. Don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel to explore more meaningful stories together. Thanks for watching this story today. Wishing you a peaceful day, and see you in the next videos.